on top of it. You guys are giving me all these
That's
things
the
that are
first
much
challenge.
bigger than my body.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us here at the Michael C. Carlos Museum, and to those joining us via Zoom. My name is Ruth Allen. I'm the curator of the Greek and Roman art collection here at the Carlos, and the curator of the special exhibition that's open for about 10 more days, closing on November the 27th. This is Making an Impression, the art and craft of ancient engraved gemstones. And it's part of the programming for this exhibition that I am delighted that we have Lauren Visconti joining us here at the Carlos today, an Atlanta-based tattoo artist who is hosting a tattoo pop-up here at the museum as part of the exhibition, where she will be tattooing flash inspired by images on the gemstones, the gems that are displayed in the exhibition. And I'm so happy that you were up for this,
Yes.
for this sort of proposition when I emailed you, and that you've kind of been willing to come and have a chat with us today as well. We're going to talk about tattoos. We're going to talk about imagery and classicism, and a little bit about the gems as well. But for those in the audience who perhaps are not familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us about your journey to becoming a tattoo artist and your practice.
Well, I'm originally from Boston, moved here in 2008 to go to school, and then I just stayed. I started working in shops when I was probably like 16, 17, just kind of doing front desk stuff. And then it just kind of went from there. And I worked on and off in shops throughout until about like 7, 8 years ago. And then I was like, okay, this is like what I'm really want to do. I think I kind of ended up getting really into them, or just being interested in them at a really, really young age, like little tiny. My grandmother is a biker, and she had a tattoo on her hip, and I like thought it was so cool. All of her friends always had tattoos, so it wasn't something that I wasn't used to seeing. And then when I was about, I don't know, 9 or 10, went to Cancun, and my mom dragged me along to watch her get a tattoo. And after that, I was like, oh, this is exactly what I want to do. I was like, this is super cool. And I mean, I really thought, I don't think until that moment I realized that tattoos were something that you had to like go and get. Like, I thought it was like something that people just like hitting puberty or something, where like you just like got them at some point. Like, it wasn't something as like a little kid that I put 2 and 2 together. And then after that, I was like, oh, this is really neat. And I remember being like real little, like drawing, like being like, this is what my back piece is going to look like. And it's like, I'm like 10, 11, 12, like drawing, tattoos that I'm like never got, thankfully, because they're not cute, but I mean, yeah, but I mean, I have plenty of bad ones to make up for it. But as you end up with over time being a tattooer, you end up with more bad ones than good ones.
Say this for the people coming to
Yeah.
I'm really struck by 2 of the things that you've just said about sort of your I guess your journey, your personal journey to of discovering tattoos. And one is that it was women, these kind of significant women in your life that had tattoos that kind of introduced you to that, and sort of thinking about the very long and expansive history of tattooing across world cultures. But for me, thinking specifically about the sort of ancient Mediterranean world, tattoos, there are a number of really kind of interesting instances of women being tattooed from the ancient world.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some amazing work being done by a professor of anthropology at the University of Missouri, St. Louis, who's been working on tattoos on on Egyptian mummified human remains, a number of whom are are women, and there seems to be this really kind of interesting connection between the
like
sort of
those
expressions of gender,
and all those I think there was like a bunch of Viking like women,
these warrior women, and
like the graves they found that were like that they had like all the beautiful like horses that they had on them. I think it's really cool. It's also interesting because as time has gone on too, breaking into this like industry as a woman or a girl or any whatever, it's definitely been something that's been more of like a boys club for a very long time. It's really hard, to get in, and just it's a difficult thing to navigate as a lady in the tattoo world. But once you get there, you're good. But it's definitely something that's a little bit harder. I mean, it's kind of like that across the board. I think
many things, right?
Yeah, but that especially because it was just such a manly kind of, it was just for a while, especially just here in America, through the like it's 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It was, only for the seedy underbelly or sailors or whatever. But now it's something that that people can kind of come together and relate to each other on. I have people that come in that are my clients that are doctors or whatever, and then you've got the people that are like bartenders or whatever else. It's not something that's exclusively for one set of people anymore. It's like all across the board, anybody can. And especially with how many different sort of styles that there are now too with tattooing, people can really kind of like pick exactly who they want to get tattooed by, the environment they feel comfortable getting tattooed in, what they want. There's so many different little things and niches now that are in the tattoo world that people can just navigate their way through, especially with the internet. It's like makes it really easy. It's no longer like word of mouth or who knows who, which always helps, but it's
really find like the artist, the style, the location.
And it's really neat now, especially with how many different like styles and stuff there are, where I feel like the way that I draw things is like, it's like art nerd meets tattooer, like because of the fact that I don't know, like I love all the classical imagery so much. And it was actually something I was like, this is stupid. I hate this stuff when I first started at college, because of all the museums we'd go into. When you're younger, you're like, ooh, pop art and like all these like colorful whatever things. And I don't know, just at some point, something kind of just flipped. And then I was like, oh no, this is all what I want. And it's something I liked since I was little. I'd gone to Italy, and like, I remember going to Pompeii when I was like 9, and it was really awesome. My dad was like, what do you want to do when we go, And it was like the one thing that I was like, I really, really want to go. I really, really want to go. And that is definitely one of the things that's like a core memory, that's like pushed me through and continuing liking all this type of imagery. And
do you remember what it was, as the 9-year-old you, what was it about Pompeii that kind of intrigued you? Why did you want to go?
Well, there was a lot of dirty drawings and and so I was like, whoa, this is very racy. And, of course, as a little kid, but I loved, I actually really liked it because I thought that it was something that I could copy. How, you practice getting better at something. And what is it like? What do they say? Copying is the
greatest form of imitation.
And so it's like all of the things that they had, they were all very flat, right? It's like all the drawings are very flat, so you don't have to worry about figuring out certain kind of angles or those kind of things.
Like a kind of there's a formula to those images, and there's a kind of they're easy to replicate in a way.
So I liked that a lot because I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. Or it was things that I could like trace over and over and get the muscle memory. And it ended up helping me later down the road to draw other things, but it was such a good way to start. Also a lot of like floral kind of, or like patterns. And I love doing tedious things and like repetitive things. So that kind of, that kind of called to me as well.
I think it's really interesting just to hear what sort of caught your eye and caught your attention, because I think a lot of us, when we think of classical art, we tend to think of something that's quite I don't know, I'm going to say it, that's kind of quite boring, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of, you know, it's that same group of, you know, white marble sculptures over and over and over again.
It can seem repetitive.
It can seem repetitive, it can seem kind of cold, it can seem kind of hard to access. And I think so often the way in which the ancient Mediterranean world is presented in places like museums is it kind of pushes all that sort of the dirty, the funny, the salacious to the side, because it's sort of not classical enough. And actually often, you know, that's missing a whole
human element.
Exactly. The kind of the real lived experience of these people from this time in this place. And I think, you know, I love that's what kind of caught your attention. Completely.
It's a really nice thing too, because it's something that's like bigger than yourself, you know, but you can make it your own and kind of find your way within all of it, you know, like make your own little mark. So like I love taking classical imagery and then modernizing it and making it to where it like applies now. And that's just literally what art is, it's just a repetitive, you know. Now, I mean, there's no such thing as original anything anymore. It's just what people take from different things that they've picked up in other places and how they apply it to make it something new and their own. And it's neat because I mean these things have been around for forever. It makes you feel really tiny, but in a really big way, you know, that you're a part of it. You're a human. That's part of being a human being and finding your place within existing. And it's neat, right?
I don't know. Profound.
Yeah,
completely. And I think for classical art specifically, because the iconography has, you know, because artists have been looking at it and responding to it for as long as it's existed, right? This, you know, this is what the Romans were doing when they were looking at Greek art. They were seeing something and they were replicating it and reproducing it for their own needs. And it's just continued. So we've had 2000 years of exactly this process. And I think in a way, that's maybe what makes classical art so such a rich resource potentially, because it can be so easily replicated and manipulated and altered, and it kind of has this symbolic quality perhaps.
Like, and it's like same thing with tattoos. And I mean, if you were to think about them making all of the things that they made with like marble and just things to like last, everybody wants to be remembered, everybody, whatever. I mean, but I've got so many people walking around out there with my art.
Yeah, you're out there.
Nobody's going to be able to forget me. I mean, I'll be around longer. I'm sure at some point those things will be around longer than I will, you know. It's just kind of neat to think about in that way.
You're putting something out in the world that has a kind of a permanence to it.
Semi-permanence, but and it's a symbolic thing to whoever gets it. Sometimes it just looks cool. That's totally fine too. But even that's like some where you're like, you know what, I was here in my life, or this like marked this time. And it's
so I want to talk about exactly this aspect of tattooing a little bit more, because it's sort of part of what interests me about the engraved gemstones, so the subject of the exhibition. And again, perhaps for those who haven't yet seen it and you've still got time, the exhibition is focused on this kind of small but arguably pretty significant art form from the ancient Mediterranean world. Tiny precious gemstones, highly polished and then engraved with miniature images, either cut into the surface of the stone in a technique that we call intaglio, or in relief on the stone in a technique we call cameo. And these were for the most part worn in rings, with the kind of primary function of being used as a signet. So they're being used to seal documents and to mark and identify property. So in many ways, those images are acting like signatures or like fingerprints for their owner. And so I've been really interested in thinking about how, you know, that individual, that Roman person in the 1st century CE, when they went to a gem engraver, or they went into a shop either to commission something or to buy something, you know, off the rack, what motivated the selection of that image? And in what way did the image on that stone express an aspect of their identity, be that their gender, their wealth, their status, whatever philosophy they were into, what their kind of social or cultural aspirations might have been, and how that selection of a motif could come to stand for their identity, right, for their personality.
And the gems themselves having like all those different qualities. And
completely.
you know,
there's
like it's like extra
and
double kind of
and I know you have an interest in and indeed have made jewelry as well as as well as tattoo designs, and so I kind of feel like that idea that you're selecting an image to stand for an aspect of yourself, or a kind of a sense of yourself, even if it's in a moment in time, as you might for a tattoo as well. I find that really, you know, to me, that's a kind of an immediate point of connection with people that were living in a very different time, in a very different place.
It has like a bit of mysticism attached to it too, because whether they're like, okay, this stands for this or this stands for that, it's you know, those things they're using them as like a little bit of a, I don't know, kind of like a buffer between them and whatever they're hoping for, or they're wanting, I don't know, some kind of protection of something, or
totally.
extra little oomph to get that job, you know,
absolutely, a
like,
kind of way of boosting your sense of self, or giving yourself a kind of like bigger presence, you know, in the world.
Kind of strength or something that you're like, okay, like you definitely have it already, but it's nice to have something that reminds you of that, or just makes you feel a little bit more puffed up.
I love that sort of description. And actually that makes me think back to these Egyptian these mummies that have been found with tattoos, where many of those tattoos were either acting like protective amulets to kind of protect that individual, or were sort of boosting their energy. So there's one particular mummy that has a tattoo on the throat that says "do good things," and the interpretation is that that's almost kind of giving strength to the voice of this individual, so that when they speak,
I like that a lot.
Their words are given power by the tattoo, which I think is kind of,
I like that. Oh, that's very sweet. Yeah. More people need to remember that, especially now.
Well, right. That we can go out and do good things, but that we can have these images that we carry with us that sort of enable, you know, even if it is only psychological, right? If it's only in your mind or your imagination, but kind of enabling you to be the bigger, better, whatever version of yourself, or to remind you of a significant moment.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah. I love all of the imagery that's on those gems too. They're really great, especially I like kind of the difference between two, like who the wearer might have been in regards to what's on it. It's kind of neat to like give it a think. You know.
Completely, because we really, you know, so often with objects from the ancient, you know, from the ancient world anywhere, but in particular from the ancient Mediterranean, you know, I don't know who actually was wearing those gemstones. I can't really pinpoint
them. You hope that they're a really great person, but there could have been really terrible people with really cool rings. You know,
this is also true. This is also true. And I think, you know, to go back to what you said about, you know, when you have clients that come in and they just pick a tattoo because they like it, you know, sometimes as historians of the ancient world, we're kind of coming up with these theories about why something was significant. And maybe actually it was just that, you know, on that day, it was a cool image on a cool gem. That's what they wanted. And it spoke to them. I mean,
if people went through like my t-shirt collection and just like judged me purely on that, I'd be like very upset, you know, like especially, or like you go back through some like middle school pictures. Those are some dark times, you know what I mean? Like,
we don't need to talk about them.
So like, you know, I get it.
So I'm interested a little to talk about your process, because something that again has always fascinated me with the gems is actually thinking about, you know, how were these things engraved? You know, how does one practically go about, you know, carving a tiny image on a tiny shiny thing. And you know, I really think it's important to give space to the artists and to the craftspeople and to kind of acknowledge their skill. And so I would love for you to kind of talk a bit more about your process and your.
Well, I think the way that they carve those are very similar to printmaking, right? We were talking about that before. And that's oh my God, I love doing that. I did a lot of that in college and I really enjoyed that. I think I've kind of brought that along with me too. A lot of the drawings and how I draw things. uh, one of my favorite ways, and actually how I still draw a lot of stuff, is like taking things away rather than drawing them. So I'll draw something and it's like really big and thick and ugly. And then I literally will erase all the lines around it. And that's how I end up a lot of the times finding the shapes and what I'm drawing, which is totally backwards from like how a lot of people draw. I'm a weirdo. I know, it's fine. But that's how I kind of ended up figuring out and like relearning how to draw for printmaking, because you start with like, and you have to take away rather than going on top of it. And I mean, you only have to screw up a few times with those mats. You're like, ooh, this is expensive. I got to get out of this very quickly. Yeah. Yeah. They're like $25 each. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm in college.
And I think about exactly the same, the engravers of these like very expensive precious stones that, one mistake and you're
and
done.
you're like, well, there goes my grade. Yeah. So
we had a gem engraver, a contemporary gem engraver on campus last week. And he was sort of saying, really, when you make a mistake, you can sort of try and sort of rescue it, but actually you're done. Like the stone is done. You
can only take away so much. And then you're like, it's just one giant blob. And you're like, oh, that's cool. That looks great. Yeah.
But I mean, I think this idea of kind of refining your designs, but I think actually is part of for me personally, the appeal of your work, that it is this really kind of, that there's a looseness, but there's a real kind of,
intentional.
Super intentional, very kind of precise and sort of fine,
thanks.
design.
I appreciate that.
It's
I had one of my coworkers actually was like, I don't know how you do it, but you put a lot of detail in without having to like draw a lot of lines, which I thought I actually took that as a really nice, compliment, because the way that he draws is like a million billion tiny, teeny tiny little lines. I'm like, well, that gives me anxiety. But like, he's like, I don't know how you do it. I'm like, well, thanks. That was actually a really nice, like weird compliment, but I'll take it.
Yeah, for sure.
I think with a lot of those relief prints and with the gems is that people, they allow room within the design so that you plug the rest of the information in with your brain. So they only give you as much information as you need because they're assuming that you're smart enough to figure out the rest of it by, I mean, people do that all the time with lots of stuff. Even when they read books, you're plugging things in before you're done with the sentence and you're like, oh, or singing a song, where you're like, oh, I know where this song's going to go.
Right.
But before it's done.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing with drawing.
And I think when we're thinking about the tattoo image, and maybe I think this could be applicable to the images on the gems. I don't want to kind of belabor that point too much, the connection too much, but that opportunity to kind of read in, to complete the story, to kind of add your emotion, to kind of, feel yourself be one with that image, to be kind of to embody the rest of the story is pretty powerful.
And it helps to also with longevity. I mean, if you're tattooing, it's on skin that ages and gets wrinkly and saggy and changes shapes and moves and all that kind of stuff. And not everything works well as a tattoo. Sometimes just like if you take too much away from a relief print, if you add too much into a tattoo, it turns out just as muddy. So I think it's like finding the sweet spot after a while, figuring all that out.
So when you were looking at the gems, and we spent a great time in the exhibition together, can you talk a little bit about, why you selected the images that you did, or kind of what, where you were finding your inspiration
from this exhibit? Honestly, the shape, I really love different shape, like the shapes of it. Some of it was, so some of the designs I did aren't exact, redrawings of what's on the gems, but more of the subject matter of what the gem, where that comes from. So for example, I'll give you one of the designs. I don't know if anybody's seen them, but you can look at them afterwards later. There's a design that's like a still life. And so it has the skull in there and the wine and the bread. And there's a gem that's in there that is what is it? It's like the live for today type
the memento mori skeleton.
So that's what I base that off of, because the skeleton itself, the gem is like the skeleton that's like lounging back like this. It's like a
Having a
thing.
good time.
And he's like leaning on a loaf of bread. I tried to draw it and I was like, this looks crazy. Like, I don't know who's like, unless it's like,
what those Romans were thinking.
yeah, I'm like,
right?
I mean, unless it's like a direct thing where somebody's going to explain it every time, be like, look, I know this is strange that this skeleton is like chilling on a loaf of bread and drinking some wine, but this is what it's from. Nobody wants to do that all the time. It gets tiring.
Yeah.
So I figured it would be a lot better and a lot more applicable and enjoyable to look at aesthetically as a tattoo, not as a cool gem, if it was like a still life that that encompassed all that information.
Yeah, for sure.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's like, I guess, did that help? I don't
Yeah,
know.
no,
Did that answer? Okay.
completely. And I think it kind of takes us back to that idea that kind of classical, mythology, philosophy, and iconography sort of has become it's weird, right? Like I think on the one hand, we're very familiar with a lot of this imagery because it's been replicated everywhere. It's all over our public buildings. It's, it's in our museums, it's in our higher education institutions. It's kind of, it's imagery that a lot of people, even if it's kind of passive, we're aware of it. And I think sometimes we forget that it's also really strange. And I think so much of the narrative around the ancient Mediterranean world about Greece and Rome is that, oh, they're just like us. And it's like, well, yes, they are sometimes, but also there's a lot about that world that is very much not like us. And I think it's kind of good to be reminded of that as well.
Yeah, everything's not directly applicable.
Yeah,
thankfully.
Completely. But I
wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I was
right.
Yeah,
you were just replicating it.
My life would be much, much different. Probably pretty bad. Yeah.
But I'm always fascinated by the way that classical imagery seems to just kind of be kind of this endless sort of this kind of self-replenishing resource, right? That is kind of, it's there for artists to use. I think it gets whatever they need.
Overlooked a lot of times too.
And it gets dismissed as like old
because it's
fashioned,
repetitive,
right?
And it's like, if you pick little things and then make it new, make it fresh, shine it up a little bit, make it your own, then all of a sudden it's interesting again, finding the little things in there that do catch your interest or catch your eye. And a lot of the imagery too, just the drawings themselves, I mean, are things that even now in tattooing, or you see them, it's they're repetitive things that are used because they work.
Right.
There's like like you can change things up and make it your own. And then some of it where it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So it's just, it's a cool, like, design. It's like this, just figuring that out and hoping you don't screw up.
I'd love to open up to the audience if anyone else has any questions before I kind of keep going. I don't know if anybody wants to.
How you have to.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I know how you have to be able to gauge for aging.
So for those on Zoom, I'll just repeat. That was a question about how do you accommodate the future of your tattoos, right? So how do you work with aging skin, or how do you think about what's going to happen to that tattoo over time?
Well, everybody's skin is like different textures, different elasticities and consistencies and all that kind of stuff. It's taking into account where it's going, what the design is, and then accounting for size really is a lot to do with that. A lot of times the tinier things are, the worse they're going to age. And I mean, the design itself, like I was saying earlier, just if it's an older person, usually skin gets more kind of papery or like creepy as you get older because you're losing elasticity. So that means that you don't want to pack a bunch of things in and have it super itty bitty, tiny. But the application of the tattoo itself, a lot of it has to do with the pressure and how deep you go, or how much you go, how hard you're pushing, or just like anything, just I guess it's a constant what's the word I'm looking for, adjustment for person to person on how you're gonna do that. I don't know, am I making any sense at all? Okay, great.
Other questions? I'd quite like to go back to that to thinking about women and tattoos a little bit. And then also the conversation we had around the sort of the mystical possibilities of tattoos. I'm just sort of thinking about tattooing in sort of, you know, the long tradition of tattooing in many different cultures, and how that's often and I'm looking at Megan here, a professor of Arts of the Americas, our kind of curator here, and thinking about how tattoos can be a way of sort of embodying the divine on a mortal body, and indeed of making that mortal body be like a god.
Yeah, totally.
Which is something I'm thinking about, the sort of the power of that act of tattooing, and how perhaps that rests in the permanence of it.
Yeah, you're kind of honoring yourself when you're, you know, in a way of when you're getting a tattoo, definitely putting something back into yourself. So many people also, when they come to get tattoos, they're like, this is like a me day, you know, or like, oh no, this is me time, or, oh, I needed that, my tattoo therapy, which is like, okay, sure. But, but you know, it's something that people take away, that it's something specific to them. No one can take it away from you once you get one. Nothing's going to last you longer, you know. You'll never buy anything that's going to last you longer than a tattoo.
Right.
Whether, I mean, it doesn't mean it's always going to look good, but it won't go anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere. You'll have it. You can't misplace it. So, I mean, it might get lost under a roll eventually or something like that, but you'll know roughly where it was when it got there to begin with.
It's sort of all part of the journey. When I was sort of preparing for this conversation, and I was sort of looking at you know, traditions of tattooing, and there was this kind of extraordinary again a mummified human remains from an indigenous Philip tribe from the Philippines, where the tattoo you know, was sort of these amazing series of abstract designs that were sort of mapping the geography of the land where those people lived. And it sort of really struck me that perhaps, you know, tattooing, even if it's not as specific in that sense, we're still kind of mapping a sense of ourselves and our bodies. We're kind of, you know, tracing a history.
Oh, sure.
Tracing, you know, an experience.
Yeah,
kind of
and
marking time.
Absolutely. Styles. And you think of like back in the 90s, like how huge like tribal was. And now you're like, ooh. But then all of a sudden now it's coming back, and I'm still like, ooh, but good for you. Well, I guess you weren't around long enough, because this is not gonna look good later. But it's something that it's like the same thing, you know, it's like a marking of time, a marking of like where society, where the cultural, everything was that one moment, you know.
Do you, and maybe you don't want to say yes or no, but how often, you know, do you get asked to tattoo things that you really just don't want to do?
Not really anymore. Because I set such like rigid parameters. I mean, it's taken a really long time for me to get there. But I also go out of my way to spend extra time of getting like flash and pre-existing designs ready, and have things like, you know, if you go on my website, it's like build your own still life. So most of the time you're tattooing or you're drawing a lot of the same things over and over and over and over and over. There's only so many ways that me, myself, would enjoy or like, or in my style, draw those items, right? Or those images. So I just try to take the time beforehand and think of all the things that I get asked to do all the time on a pretty regular basis, and draw as many versions of that as possible, and then stick it up there. And then if people want to do little tweaks here and there, that's fine. Totally, always. But it's an image that people have to start from, rather than grabbing images from somewhere else and then them being like, hey, can you draw it like you draw it?
Right.
Where some of the images that I was sent in the past, where I'm like, I would never even draw this in the first place. I don't even know how I would draw it. This is not a subject matter in any way that I'm like, you know, and I think it's important when you're getting started, you tattoo whatever makes you money, whatever will pay your electric bill. You're like, okay. And it's all practice, right? Just learning different skills and how to get better at whatever, and knowing how to tattoo in a few different ways, and then figuring out what you like, what you enjoy the most. And of course, you're going to do better at the things that you enjoy, you know. And if it's a job that you've got day in and day out, I mean, it's still a job at the end of the day. But if anything, if you can do anything to make it a little bit more enjoyable and a little less sucky, then
but it's also about kind of respecting your sort of integrity and agency as an artist, right? That this is your, you know, your work is your style, it's your subject matter, it's all of these things.
You definitely don't want to be embarrassed if somebody's like, where you do a tattoo and you're like, don't tell anybody that
was me.
Yeah. Yes.
I've never seen this tattoo before.
For friends, I've done that where I'm like, okay, if you really want it, I'll do it, but don't you dare. Somebody asks you where you got this, you say you forgot.
Yes.
Yes.
Understood.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your relationship with the Carlos, because, you know,
I love it.
We are here today because I saw you posted a picture. You were here on Instagram. And I was like, oh my goodness, you know, I sort of knew you and I knew your work, but I was so kind of surprised and happy to see that you were here in the museum.
Oh, I love this museum. It's my favorite. It's my favorite one, like across the board. Personally, I think the High is really boring. It could be so much better, but it's not. And I just love this museum so much. Well, I love all the old stuff.
Yeah.
I love it. I love that there's so much old stuff. I know I can make it probably sound a lot smarter by saying something else, but I mean, I just love it. There's so many big things in here. And I guess, like I was saying before, like, I like to be reminded how tiny I am as far as like in the grand scheme of the world existing. I think it helps to like keep you level and, you know, and also to be like, okay, how big can I make myself within that, you know? And all the stuff that's here, it's so pretty, it's so gorgeous. And I'm able to like, whenever I walk through, hopefully I'm allowed, I don't know, but I take a lot of pictures and from like a million different angles. And it's kind of like going back to school, right? Where you have like drawing, doing figure drawing. And so it's, instead of, you know, searching reference photos on the internet nonstop and trying to find something, it's nice to be able to do it when you're in person and not have to rely on what's already been like documented on the or like readily available with a good enough photo from the internet.
Right.
And
because it's, you know, everything has been selected for you, that, you know, the angle that the object has been photographed from, whereas actually, the power and the charisma of an object encountered in person, you know, is always going to be more than a photograph, however good that photograph is.
I love it.
And of course, for many of us, that's the only way we get to access all kinds of objects and artworks. But
it makes me feel, whenever I've come, it's always been when I've been starting to get kind of stagnant or a little like annoyed with just working or drawing or anything. And coming here has always been a really nice reminder of like why I like doing what I do in the first place. Whenever I like leave, I'm always like, like I feel like my chest is like literally full when I leave.
That's pretty nice to hear.
I love it. It's great.
I think there's something in what you're saying about sort of feeling your sense of self in against the sort of the largeness of human existence and human cultural production and experience, and sort of, you know, like understanding how we
crisis.
But I think especially in a world in which, you know, we all live pretty individual lives, you know, and I'm not against social media, but we're all living our lives through our phones increasingly, or through our computer screens, you know, through our work laptops, all of these things. It's sort of good to be reminded that actually we're communal, connected creatures, not just now, but through time and space. And I think that's a pretty powerful thing to harness, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I just love it. I love walking through. I love the way that it's also, you guys have done a really good job of setting it up, where you walk through and the flow of everything too. It's really nice. And you guys always have really good, you know, rotating exhibits, especially the gem one. I mean,
Obviously,
even if
I didn't pay her to say this.
No, even if I wasn't doing this, I definitely would have been like, now, like, yeah. So
I think, and for me, I mean, I'm so happy to hear that, because I think, you know, this is a group of ancient objects that you know, our collection, the bulk of which was donated to us by a single collector 10 years ago, and it's just been in storage. And a lot of museums don't put these objects on display because they're tiny and they're finicky and they're difficult to light. But I think as objects that really get you to think about making and craftsmanship and production, they're incredible.
Yes, and a lot of like, or I guess what you were saying too about why I think this museum actually does focus a lot on the craftsmanship aspect of art, more so than other places you go. It's all paintings, you know, and that's fine. I'm not
We're not hating on painters here.
No. You do it, you do you. I personally hate painting. I like looking at paintings. I don't actually like painting myself. But I've always liked the craftsmanship aspect of art much more than just sitting there painting or just sitting there and just drawing, where I'm like, okay, I drew this now. Like, how can I apply this to something else and make something else out of just the drawing itself, you know? Which
in many ways is actually what you're doing. You know, some people might say, oh, but hey, you're just drawing, but actually you're kind of sculpting people, right? You're working in 3 dimensions with your designs.
Yeah, you're taking a flat and then applying it to another medium,
right?
You know,
making someone new, which I think, you know, when we think about adornment in all its different forms and all its different media, often that sort of act of enhancing the body with a tattoo, with jewelry, with clothing, is a way of making yourself new, right? Of making yourself something different. And that is a kind of sculpting, right? That is a kind of craftsmanship, and that's
sure. It's the outfit you can't take off.
That's it. I wonder if that's a good place to pause. If there are questions in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Question?
Ancient cosmetics contained toxic chemicals such as mercury, arsenic, and lead. Do tattoo inks have similar toxins?
No, absolutely not. Most of the inks are vegan, and they have no bad stuff anymore. I mean, those things are gonna they would kill people or turn them different colors and make them very sick. So no, everything is very, very, very safe. There's lots of lawsuits that happen now. So those kind of chemicals aren't in any of the inks anymore. No.
I don't know enough about what was used for ancient tattoos. I suspect they will have contained lead and other kind of chemicals that we would not certainly use today. I really encourage anyone interested to look at Anne Austin's work at the University of Missouri, who's done some really kind of cutting edge analysis of exactly this topic.
Next question is, what kind of perspective do you have as you tattoo today with the tools and knowledge that you use and have acquired compared to tattoo artists of 100, even 1,000 years ago in relation to how they accomplished their art form?
Well, I think tattooing obviously now is a lot more commercialized than it was back then. And the type of people and the reasons behind why people are getting tattooed were completely different. So my perspective on it would be a little bit lighter, probably, in context to what people were getting 100, 200 years ago. And also I have to be a lot cleaner and neater about it than they did 100, 200 years ago. There's a lot more health things that you got to make sure of, and it's probably a lot safer. It's probably a lot, and people are a lot more specific on what they want. The application too of just being able to do something exactly the same repetitively, that was, something that back then they didn't have.
And I wonder also about the time a tattoo would have taken, when you're not using an electric drill.
Oh, sure. Much longer.
Much longer. And
especially if they're using some kind of dull bone or something.
Right. If they're, if they're
probably a lot more painful, I'm sure.
Yeah.
As much as painful as tattoos can be, I'm sure repetitively smashing yourself in the arm or somebody else in like an arm or a leg or even their face sometimes, that I'm sure was not very enjoyable on a whole nother level than it
And
could be now.
And actually that sort of makes me think, and I'm really not expert on the topic in antiquity, but I think if we assume that this is a longer and more painful process, the idea that, maybe we're looking at priests who are getting tattooed in Egypt, maybe we're looking at, shaman in the Americas, maybe we're looking at
Or also people,
warrior women or warrior, male warriors. So it's kind of it becomes a sort of marker of significance and status to endure this kind of painful
and to have
thing.
the time to not work and to sit there long enough and have somebody else do that to you too. I mean, you think about even now where people are like, ooh, I wish I could get that, but I can't afford it. But then you think about however long ago too, being able to take that amount of time, hours and hours and hours out of whatever day, and then, to pay someone or contract them and whatever, whether they're bartering or anything like that, to do those types of things. I mean, to take that amount of time out of your day, if you're having to actively continuously look for food or make sure that you have shelter or any of those kind of things, it's definitely even more of a sacrifice, that time and that going through that, than it would be to pop into a shop on the corner for like 15 minutes and get something, be like, now I'm going to brunch, like it's something.
Right. And the cost, I mean, we know from Herodotus, who writes one of the kind of earliest histories within the ancient Greek world, and he says how the Thracian people who are a tribe that live in kind of the Black Sea region, how for the Thracians, tattoos were absolutely a marker of wealth and status. And I think that might have to do with the cost of the materials, and again this idea of the kind of the time. And how, he even says, not having tattoos is sort of a marker of the lower class people.
Right. Yeah.
But what becomes interesting in the sort of the history of the ancient Mediterranean is because the Athenians enslaved a lot of Thracians, the tattoo became a marker of enslaved status kind of once it's transferred, once these Thracians are now in Athens, occupying a very different social status, so that it's completely reversed kind of what the significance of
and it was
is.
Like that for a good long time,
right?
But now
all kinds of things.
But now everybody can get one, right? All of you can get one.
Unfortunately, we only have 21 slots that people can get here at the museum. So Lauren, could you just say a little something about how people can, who weren't able to book a slot here at the museum,
I believe
come to you?
I believe it's November 27th or the 28th, but I posted a link, and I think it's on my website. And I opened up, I believe there's like 10 or 15 additional slots for these designs, specifically to do on another day. And I'll still have them around, they're not going anywhere. I'll probably draw more stuff from the stuff you sent me because I got them now. But
the resources.
Yes, I'm like, ooh, yes, give me. But yeah, I mean, they're not going anywhere. I think I opened my books again sometime at the end of this month. It's all if you go to my website, it's littlestmoontattoo.com. All the information's on there. So if you want to book with me, I have it's it's a form you have to fill out, just saying what you want and where you want it, how big, so that it helps me to schedule everything a lot more neatly and streamline everything. But it's all there. You can find me. I'm not hard to find.
We just put it in the chat for those of you.
Oh, great. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks.
And we're, really grateful to have you here and to have your your expertise and your enthusiasm.
I'm very, very thankful, very grateful. When you sent me that message, I was like, oh, hell yeah. I was like nerding out super hard. I was very excited. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I would say if you want to